The topic of my talk is Scholars or Friends, Women in John Paul II's Life. And I believe it is a very important topic because this was a very important Pope. Given the fact that yesterday we celebrated the 11th anniversary of his death, it is more and more important to talk about him because we remember him less and less. The memories about the Pope, the first-hand memories of people who rejoiced at him being elected the Pope, who rejoiced at him visiting their countries, are slowly fading away. And this is an especially comfortable moment for all the people who want to recreate the past to start talking about it. Because we still remember there was a Pope, we still remember he was a Slavic Pope, we know that he had exceptional attitude towards modernity, that he tried to embrace modernity in church, and at the same time we no longer remember the details. So this is the very good moment to start reinvent the details, and I would just like to expand on it a little bit. This is the image of John Paul II visiting his country for the first time. This is the average number of people that used to meet him when he made pilgrimage to a country. It's millions of people. He was a charismatic person, and every meeting with the Pope at the beginning of his pontificate and at the end of his pontificate was a great spiritual experience. For some people it was only emotional, for other people it was both emotional and spiritual. However, it is the scale about which we are talking. And please remember, it's 1979, so it's not an era where we have the internet, it's not an era where we have mobile phones, it's not a moment when people can quickly communicate and say, oh, let's go there, or let's meet there. This is the moment where the information was restricted, he was visiting a communist country, and this is the turnout he had, millions of people. The slogan of John Paul II's pontificate, his motto, was Totus Tuus, which means all yours. Of course, it describes his devotion to the Virgin Mary. However, Totus Tuus is in fact a motto which describes his attitude also towards all the people that he pilgrimaged to, that he spoke to, that he spent time with. He was all the time with the people, he was all theirs. From the very beginning of his path as a priest, he was working with people. He was most interested in marriage, and from the very beginning, when he was working with the youth, he was exploring the nature of this relationship, which was not his vocation. His vocation was priesthood. However, as a priest, he was most interested in marriage, in human dignity, and in what happens to people when they enter into a marriage and how they share the God's intent together. They are no longer separate human beings, separate persons, they are together. And they, in a spiritual way, they become one. So he was most interested in exploring this relationship, and when he was beginning his work as a young priest, he started a ministry that worked with the youth. And his way to avoid communist control and communist interference, so to say, was to organize trips into the nature. So it was frequent for him to go with the academic youth that he was taking care of into the woods or into some regions of Poland that had multiple lakes where they could canoe, because this gave him the opportunity to work with people the way he used to always work, that is, to talk to them and to see how they think. This exploration of human mind, of human spirituality, was his method of work as a priest, which again is extremely important when we analyze any kind of relationship he has had with anyone. Because again, in the era where we didn't have internet and mobile phones, letters were the only way we could communicate with people who are not close to us and who don't have telephones. And let's not forget that in the communist countries, and in communist Poland included, the phone was a rare good. Phone was not something everybody had at home. Phone was something that was a privilege, and sometimes even if you were given this privilege was being listened to by intelligence service. So if people wanted to go private, they would rather go like this, into nature, into the surroundings where they could easily see if somebody is listening, or they would write letters. However, letters were censored too. But please, whenever you consider the relationships of John Paul II before he became a pope, you have to remember it's a communist country. It's very particular way of existence because you are being watched, you are being controlled, and the church is not a friend of the communist state. So this is the conditions in which the Pope was beginning his priesthood and his work with people. Here is another dimension of his pontificate, that is the pilgrimage. He made 104 travels to foreign countries. He was the first pontiff who traveled so extensively, and wherever he went, he was trying to show the universal church. Ecumenism was one of the aspects of his pontificate, and the enormous popularity he enjoyed might be partly to that he was being seen as a new apostle. Here is another example of the regular turnout he used to have. It's Poland again, as you can see, is packed with people, totally dense. And here is the event that we are not often discussing nowadays, in contrary to his possible love life, the aspect of martyrdom. There was an attempt to take Pope's life. Luckily for us, it was not successful. However, ever since he was shot, he suffered physical pain as a result of it. He was a man who was exceptional also through showing us how to live in pain, how to live with illnesses. He was a popular man, vastly popular man. So can you imagine what it means for a person who is recognizable everywhere to publicly suffer from Parkinson's disease till the very end of it? Till the moment when you're crippled, when your facial features no longer are what they used to be, when you can barely speak. And all this road he went with us. And one more thing important in relation to him is this. This is the man who spoke to his own assassin. The man who forgave his own assassin and who said, if it's possible to free him earlier, do that. He was the man capable of mercy that is probably not achievable to most of us. He was a saint. And he was meeting saints. I put this picture here because this is a usual expression of affection of John Paul II. He was stroking somebody's cheek. He used to do that a lot. And I've seen it as a proof of some sort of liaison in different publications and newspapers and films. Well, it is a sign of affection that he gives to everyone. Whenever he feels some emotional closeness, whenever he wants to express tenderness, this is what he does. But we have to focus on his aspect of scholarship, because I could talk about John Paul II for many hours. We don't have that much time. What I want to focus on is his work on a person, because all his friendships, all his relationships with men and women are a part of his pastoral work. As a priest, as a person who has a vocation for priesthood, he was interested in all the vocations of human being, which is marriage too. So he was working on the concept of the person that would allow him to understand the marriage, and that would allow us to understand the marriage. And he was trying to work on the concept of body and spirit being complementary things. Because as you know it, and as it is often portrayed in the popular media, the Catholic Church is supposed to be somehow suspicious of the body. And of course, when you look throughout the ages of ecclesiastical experience, and when you read the writings of many popes, those attitudes, of course, reflect the spirit of the times. So we had epochs when they were more suspicious of the body. There were epochs when they were less suspicious, but still there was some sort of division, body and soul. Whereas our Pope had a completely new concept. He saw the body as a complement of the spirit. He says that actually God was incarnate in the body. So this is like a hint to us that body is an important thing. It's not something to be discarded. It's something that exists because God wanted it to exist. But how to put this bodily existence into the frame of Catholic teaching, how to live a saintly life with the body. And this was his point of interest throughout his work with people, throughout his work with the youth ministry, and then later on when he was refining his point of view, he was always interested in the role of men and women in marriage and how this reflects their relationship with God. And this is how the theology of the body was created. I'm going to discuss it on the next at the next step. However, all the time we have to remember that the main assumption is genealogia divina, which means the persuasion that the man was created by God, that the body of the man was created by God, and that it reflects God in some way, that we are made in the image of God. So theology of the body was a topic that he was working on for many years, from his activity with the youth ministry, which was in the 1950s, through books that he published on the topic, the talk with John Paul, with Paul VI on Humanae Vitae encyclical, and later on through the first years of his pontificate. So his, let's say, public coming out on love and responsibility in church and also sex in marriage was in the 1960s in the book Love and Responsibility. It was greatly controversial in Poland at that point because in the 1960s it was unheard of a priest to talk about those things. It was not talked about. It was a matter that the church was not actually interested in, officially. However, there were developments in the world. There was sexual revolution coming. The contraceptive pill was being invented. So there were new possibilities opening to humans towards which the church had to take a stance. So it was discussed, and a part of what Cardinal Wojtyła, at that point still not a pope, believed and worked on was involved in Humanae Vitae encyclical, which clarified the stance of the Catholic Church on abortion and contraception. And later on, when the Pope became the when Cardinal Wojtyła became a pope, he was starting from that. On his Wednesday general audiences, he was talking about the theology of the body. He had short lectures, so to say, about the marriage, about what marriage is, what the vocation of a human being in marriage is, what the human dignity in marriage is, and that the ultimate goal of marriage is salvation. Because the ultimate goal of the Christian marriage is salvation. We are usually sliding on the surface of things when we talk about our faith. We take the most accessible, the most superficial level, and discuss forever about contraception and other things without actually clarifying that the aim of two people that are united in marriage is to find salvation. So he tried to clarify this perspective, and his first audience was about unity and indissolubility of marriage. So of course I encourage everyone to read the book Man and Woman, He Created Them, because this is what assembles all the audiences, and this is what theology of the body is based on. This is the seminal book, the most important book for this topic, and it is really a revolution. I only wish more people were interested in it. Another important aspect to understand all the relationships of Pope with men and women is his Marian devotion. He lost his mother when he was only 9, and ever since he gave the place of a mother in his life to the Virgin Mary. He was very devoted to the Virgin Mary. During his pilgrimages, he was visiting Marian sanctuaries wherever he could. And he was always looking for inspiration. As you can see, he was wearing Carmelite scapular at the age of 10. Carmelite scapular gives you some privileges of the Carmelite order, but you also have to pray every day and express your devotion towards Virgin Mary, apart from wearing the scapular, of course. Later on, he belonged to Sodality of Our Lady and also to the Circle of the Living Rosary. And in the Circle of the Living Rosary, he met a man who inspired him to become a priest. He met a man who was a mystic and who inspired him to read the St. John of the Cross. And ever since, the Pope was more and more into the mystery of the Rosary and to the mystery of the motherhood of God, the motherhood of the Mother of God that encompasses all of us. At the time when he was working in the Rosary Circle, he read the Treatise on True Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and his motto, Totus Tuus, which has a lengthy it's a longer, and it's in Latin, so I'm not able to read it to you. However, in translation to English, the whole motto of our Pope was, I am whole yours, and everything what is mine belongs to you. Be in whatever belongs to me. Give me your heart, Mary. So he is completely living in this reality where the Mother of God, the pure virginity, the all-encompassing love towards other people is his daily reality. And of course it reflects in his work where he when he publishes on the topic an encyclical Redemptoris Mater and the apostolic letter Rosarium Virginis Mariae. Here are just 3 examples of the let's say the sanctuaries that he especially valued. This is Kalwaria Zebrzydowska, a place where he went to with his father shortly after his mother died. and for which he had special devotion all his life. Here is the main sanctuary of Poland, Jasna Góra, with the Queen Mary, Mother of Poland. And here is Fatima. And I put here the image of the crown of the Virgin Mary, because in the crown of the Virgin Mary of Fatima, there is a votive gift of our Pope, the bullet that he was hit with, and the bullet that in a mysterious way traveled in his body in such a way that it omitted all the vital organs. It's a mystery why the Pope survived the attempt, and to underline that this is the mystery, he gave the bullet to the Virgin Mother of Fatima. And now the woman in the Pope's life. On Monday, the PBS aired a BBC documentary on the life of Pope, focusing on the many years of his epistolary friendship with Anna-Teresa Tymieniecka, another woman. However, a woman with whom he had, to me, a relationship which seems to be much more intense in terms of scholarly exchange and also on the human plane, is Wanda Poltawska. He used to be a priest that regularly gave the sacrament of reconciliation to Wanda Poltawska, and later on they developed a friendship and they collaborated for many years. So she is a unique person. As a young girl, she was a girl guide. Later on, the Nazis attacked and occupied Poland, and in the occupied Poland, she was active in the underground resistance. She was a person responsible for connection. This means she was carrying hidden messages from one unit to another. Yeah, she was a liaison. So this was a very important task because it ensured the functioning of the resistance. However, whenever women were caught, they were treated as enemies. So when she was caught, she was first arrested and tortured by Gestapo. She spent 7 months in Lublin jail. And already there, she discovered that her vocation is to help people, because she shared a cell with a girl that used to be a prostitute. And she was trying to become friends with this girl and to show her that she has a dignity as a human being and that she doesn't really have to be a prostitute. So even in those horrible conditions, when you're physically tortured, when you don't know if you are going to survive or not, this woman was focused on discovering the dignity in the other human beings. Later on, she was transferred to concentration camp, and there she vowed that if she ever survives this, she will become a doctor. So she was given the grace to survive Ravensbrück, and later on she became a psychiatrist and cooperated closely with the priest on building the division of pastoral medicine in Krakow, a medicine focused on the connection with religion. She was also a marriage counselor, and for 10 years she was the councilman of the city of Krakow. So as you can see, it is a woman of Renaissance, and again of deep spiritual dimension. After the concentration camp, she wrote a book, "And I Am Afraid of My Dreams." And this book was a kind of therapy for her, because even though she survived the concentration camp and already started to study to become a doctor in Poland, she couldn't sleep, because whenever she fell asleep, this would come back. Every night she would outlive the horror of her life again. So a doctor told her to tried to note down all her experiences, and this is how this book was born. However, she was also in the middle of some spiritual quest because, as she said, she left Ravensbrück camp totally demoralized as a human being. She doubted in everything, and looking for spiritual counsel, she was directed to Cardinal Wojtyła for spiritual counsel. So he became her regular sacrament of reconciliation giver. And this is how they were working together, and possibly she influenced his thinking on the dignity of the human person. Because this is the level at which we operate. I really want to stress that. 1960s, 1970s in Poland, though this is the work, pastoral work with people who have survived the war, who have to, under communist threat, face dilemmas that are far more important and far more difficult than the dilemmas that we may face now in our everyday life. So it was an unusual person, and her work with John Paul II was unusual too. I would call it building the civilization of life. It also has a miraculous aspect to it because Wanda Poltawska was diagnosed with last stadium cancer in 1962, and John Paul II, he wasn't a pope at that point yet, but he already met Father Pio. He asked Father Pio to pray for Wanda, and she regained health. She was completely healed. So having experienced this miracle, she was even closer and even more determined to continue to work with John Paul II. And first, she was combining her duties at a clinic with the marriage counseling and the activities she was doing for the church. After 16 years of psychiatric work, she decided to focus only on what she's doing with the Pope at the theological department in Krakow. And for 42 years, she lectured in pastoral medicine, and she was lecturing for 33 years at the Institute of Theology of Family. She was instrumental to the propagation of Pope's ideas on marriage and on Christian marriage, and she was interested in healthy family, preparation for marriage, and Christian sexual ethics and family planning. So this is the level of people with whom Pope cooperates. Those are not people that you just meet in the street. Those are not the ladies that are interested in reading tabloid newspapers. This is something I want to stress, because whatever film or whatever document I read about the Pope, the reality of those times is never there. They always approach the life of Pope as if it was now in America. It was not in America. It was a totally different world. So here we have the lady who used to live in America, although she came from Poland. She was born in, yes?
You can add that Wanda Poltawska is still alive, and she is giving speeches around Poland and selling 10,000 of books a year.
Yeah, she is still an active marriage counselor, but let's hurry. Yeah, I have 3 minutes now to get to my point. Well, my point is that this lady was also a scholar. She was a renowned philosopher. She had two PhDs in philosophy from Freiburg and from Sorbonne. She was a well-known phenomenologist, and she was primarily interested in John Paul II's work. The book that prompted her arrival to Poland and her her friendship with Pope was love and responsibility, because she found there a unique philosophical approach. This is what they were talking about the philosophy of human being, about the dignity of human being. And this is also what they quarreled about, because one of the most important books of John Paul II, the philosophical books, The Man and the Act, was a bone of contention between them, because for 4 years they were working on the English translation of the book, and she translated it as the acting man. So as you can see, the man and the act, where the man is separate from the act, is quite a different idea than the man in action. And what the quarrel about the book went for years, and there were many disputes between Mrs. Houtaker and the Vatican, and the Pope was not taking any stance, he was not involved. And this was mostly about how she slightly slanted his thinking. So she was a personality, no doubt. She was a scholar, no doubt. But I suppose they had many things to talk about in scholarly terms. So, just shortly about the documentary that talks about the mysterious correspondence and discusses widely the letters of Pope to Mrs. Tymieniecka. It's true that their friendship lasted 32 years. It's true that the letters are owned by the Polish National Library and that the library has the copyright to the letters. So they are rather reluctant to share them, since they can profit from them themselves, I suppose. And there is nothing scandalous in it. There is only excerpts of letter of John Paul II and the journalist who is aching to know what she wrote to the Pope. He doesn't know, so he just fantasizes about it. And he fantasizes at the level that is accessible to him. And to my mind, it's not the level of people who were involved in all those scholarly exchanges and spiritual exchanges. We are talking about people who are reforming the church. We are talking about the Pope who is giving us a new definition of marriage, a new definition of person. We only have to read him and live the rules he proposed. But no, what we can only focus is that was this friendship salacious? Well, I don't think so. I also wanted to show this because this is a typical example of what is happening. In the right upper corner, you see the Pope and in the crowd of people. And you see Mrs. Houtaker that smiles at him and the Pope that turns away to talk to another person and who smiles. This is a social situation. But what you see in the newspapers is the picture in the lower right corner, which is cropped. So you no longer see that clearly that this is a social situation, and in some way it reflects intimacy, which is not there. So either we are looking for truth, either we are interested in the life of our Pope, or we are interested in making him like one of us. Because I really believe that he was a saint. He was a man who was able to reach to the spiritual and intellectual depth that is inaccessible to other people. But all the newspapers are interested in is what they are able to see. So I'm sure that this is not truth, what they are able to see.
Wanda,